I'm recording next.
Can you stop saying actually?
All right.
It's really confusing me.
Okay, we're good. Just don't move your desk.
Recording next.
That's really creepy.
Alright, you're not recording anything, so your phone can go away. And is yours good to go? And it'll record for like an entire class with you? My gosh, iPhones have so much memory.
I've voice recorded that long. I've never done that.
Oh, well, I
We
don't
shall
want
find
to record
out.
that long. I can set it to put for an hour to record.
It is
Alright,
hard.
so we are modeling for you a lit circle for chapter 1 for the Hunger Games. We chose this book because we figured even if you haven't read it, you might have seen the movie, and if you haven't done either of those, you've at least heard about it. So if you would like to participate at any point, if you'd like to chip in your idea, feel free. And I just want you to take a couple notes about what are we doing that makes it a good discussion. So what are we talking about? How are we talking to one another? How do we move from subject to subject, etc.
You don't need any.
The first thing we're going to do is our journal entries, and ours look a little differently than yours because the other classes have to fill out this big long chart in addition to writing their journal entry, which you don't have to do, but you still have to write a journal entry. So. We're going to start with journal entries. Sure. No, we did before. Okay. And does anybody want to go first?
I don't mind going first.
All right. So.
Okay, so the goal is, again, just discussion, not just reading directly from a piece of paper. So it should be a conversation. So for my journal entry, I picked number 4, and the prompt was, cite an example of how the protagonist is a strong person. How did you feel about the characters during that scene? So obviously the protagonist in this story is Katniss Everdeen. And some of the things that I jotted down about her and how she's strong is how she's physically strong in her hunting skills. But she's also really, really emotionally strong, and for a couple of reasons. So first I'll talk about how she's physically strong. She's physically strong because of her ability to be a really good hunter. On page 5, she ventures into the woods to hunt for food and for her family. But in addition to just general hunting skills, she also encounters some dangers, or she could encounter some dangers, such as rabid animals, poisonous snakes, the electric fence. Just being in the woods itself and past the seam is illegal in itself, so she is breaking the law in that sense. So she's physically strong in that way with her hunting ability. But I feel she's a really, really strong protagonist because she is emotionally strong. And there are a couple reasons why she's emotionally strong. First of all, she's the sole provider for her family. You read in chapter 1 that her father was killed when she was 11 through a mine explosion. And we'll talk about this later and like kind of how she uses words to describe that, but she described him as being blown to bits. So obviously there's a little bit of history there with that, and she still seems to be haunted by it, yet also at the same time, the things that she learned from her father and just his death in general is kind of what keeps her going to be able to provide for her family. So I think her father's death led to her being a really strong emotionally. When her father died, her mother also kind of sunk into a deep depression and was not able to be the mother for her and her younger sister. So that's kind of how Katniss kind of jumped into this role of being the provider, you know, just emotionally strong, but also having to hunt and provide actual food so that they don't starve. So that's what my journal entry talked about, her emotional and physical strength, in a nutshell.
I think I kind of touched on the same things. I didn't do that journal entry though. I did number 3, which was what's one of the most important events in the story of what ways at the turning point in the main character's life. And I talked about how like Katniss has kind of gotten all this strength and things, and the event that I chose that has changed her life was the death of her father. So we kind of talked about the same things even though we did different ones. And I talked specifically about how she has to care for Primrose, or I guess she calls her Prim, and how it forces her to grow up, and it forces her to do all these things that she didn't have to do otherwise, or that most children didn't have to do. And some of the quotes that I pulled out for, I think, well, mine's on page 10, but I don't know if yours is. So she says, I try to remember that when all I can see is a woman who sat by blank and unreachable while her children turned to skin and bones. I try to forgive her for my father's sake, but to be honest, I'm not the forgiving type. And I guess that kind of goes with being a strong person. Like, to forgive somebody, it's not a sign of weakness, but it kind of takes a different part of you. And she's constantly having to be strong for her family. And so I noticed that there's like a tension between her and her mom that kind of goes around the death of her dad. So I thought that was important. And I did also mention the blown to bits part just because I thought it was like, I don't know, a really kind of, I don't know, uncomfortable way to talk about the death of your father.
Like your father or someone died.
Yeah, that's not how I would describe
it.
it. So, I mean, she clearly like has some sort of resentment towards like the way things were handled or the way that it was like, like either discussed or kind of how it was brought about to her. She seems like there's something that we don't know that's bothering her about it. And she also said, I still wake up screaming, telling him to like run away. So she's still haunted by it and it's still affecting her, even though it happened before the book even started. So one question I had was, I know her dad died in a mine accident, but what were the details? And then why did her mom give up? And I guess she gave up because like she lost her spouse and that's something that you can't get past. But still, to me, it seems like if you've lost somebody and you still have family to take care of, like there should be a part of you that keeps going. So I was kind of confused as to what happened with her mom.
I also did question number 3, and we found that even though we both did the same question, we actually focused on different events in Katniss's life that has shaped her and made her who she is. So the important event that I focused on actually happened at the end of chapter 1. So we don't know a whole lot about it, which led to a lot of questions, and that was the selection of her little sister Prim as the tribute for District 12. So Katniss talks throughout the whole chapter about how she tries to be strong for her family, which we've touched on, and how she tries to protect Prim with everything that she has. When her mother sank into a depression, she was there for Prim. She was strong for her family. One quote that I pulled out is on page 15, and it's Katniss saying, I protect Prim in every way I can, but I'm powerless against the reaping. The anguish I feel when she is in pain wells up in my chest and threatens to register on my face. So in every aspect of her life, all she's trying to do is protect Prim. The one way that she can't protect her is in the reaping, and as they stand there in the square, that's who's selected. Prim is picked. So that led me to wonder, well, first, one of the questions that popped up earlier was what happened to District 13? They talked about that even at the beginning of the reaping. They gave the whole history of Panem and said what happened, and said that District 13 was obliterated. So I wondered, where did that go? And why do they keep mentioning that? Also, related specifically to the question then, is what exactly happens in the Hunger Games? How old was the youngest person that's won? Since Prim's only 12, will she have to go? And since Katniss is always looking for a way to protect her, is there a way that she can do that? Can she somehow intervene and stop her little sister from basically being sent to be slaughtered?
Yeah, because there's no way Prim's going to make it.
Right, a frail, innocent, 12-year-old girl.
Who she calls Little Duck.
Yes,
Right.
Fighting to the death. Doesn't sound like it's going to go so well.
I don't think so. Especially because she's done so much to protect her that Prim doesn't have any strength. She doesn't have like any survival instincts in her because, I mean, Katniss is doing everything she can to make sure that she doesn't experience that because no kid should have to. But at the same time, it's really made her ill prepared for if she were to ever be chosen.
Good point. Okay, so I was a discussion director, so I have some questions. And if you guys want to join in and answer as well, feel free to just raise your hand. So my first question is, how does Katniss feel about the country of Panem? Why does she need to make her face an indifferent mask and be careful of what she says in public? So there's kind of 2 questions there. How does she feel about the country? So if you can give me some reasons or support, tech support for how you know. And she does mention that she feels the need to make her face an indifferent mask. So kind of thinking about what that means and why she would need to do that.
Mm-hmm. I think the first spot that she really points out is on page 6. She says, when I was younger, I scared my mother to death. The things I would blurt out about District 12, about the people who rule our country, Panem, from this far-off city called the capital. Eventually, I understood this would only lead to more trouble. So I learned to hold my tongue and turn my features into an indifferent mask. I do my work quietly in school, make only polite small talk in the public market. And at the end of that, she also says, even at home, where I am less pleasant, I avoid discussing tricky topics, like the reaping or food shortages or the Hunger Games. Prim might begin to repeat my words, and then where would we be? So I think a lot of what she's doing is she's keeping that strong face and holding her tongue so that she's not influencing her sister in a negative way. Again, she's trying to protect Prim and make sure that she's not somehow going to get into trouble with the leaders of the country or with the peacemakers that are in their town.
And I think that happened whenever they were in the woods, whenever Gale was like saying things about Hannum and about District 12 and the Capitol and things, and she even said like, well, I really wish you wouldn't say them here because it's not appropriate and it's not allowed, but I'd rather you say them out in the woods where nobody's gonna hear us than if you were to say them like whenever they're in the hall or something, because you never know who's listening.
Well, then also at the top of page 6, she says, District 12, where you can starve to death in safety, kind of like sarcastically. Yeah. But then she says, then I glance quickly over my shoulder. Even here, even in the middle of nowhere, you worry someone might overhear you. So even though she's trying to be tough, she's still obviously worried that, what she says might be heard and turned against her in some way.
Well, and then that has to make you wonder what would happen if someone overheard her say that.
Yeah.
What would the consequences be if she were to speak out against the district?
Based on everything else we know, I would assume that they'd be
quite severe.
Yeah.
Okay, good. My next question is, if you were in Katniss and Gale's shoes, would you risk your life to take care of your family? Why or why not?
I'd like to think that I would. I mean, I guess you're risking it either way, because if you don't do this, then they're probably going to starve and die, or you're going to make it even harder to survive. But at the same time, you're risking by doing what you need to survive. So it seems like it's kind of a catch-22. Like you can't win either way. I'm not a good hunter, so I probably won't do that. But maybe I could find something else that I could do to do my part and chip in. But I think I would. I think that's family instinct to try and protect your own.
Well, I actually think that it's interesting that as tough as both characters seem and the things that they're doing to support their family, when they're in the woods, they actually have a conversation and Gale says, well, why don't we just run away? So I think it's interesting to think that both of them, still teenagers, 16 and 18, that as tough as they're trying to be, they still also, Gale at least, thinks, well, why don't we just run away? The two of us can survive on our own. We don't need to go back to District 12. But again, I think it's that pull of family, knowing that they would be deserting their younger siblings and their mothers, that they just couldn't do that.
Yeah.
I don't think most people could do that.
Right.
No.
As a mother myself, never. But that's just my opinion. Okay, next question. Why do you think Suzanne Collins, she's the author, why do you think she described in great detail the amount of effort everyone put into getting ready for the reaping? What do you think this could symbolize?
I think it kind of shows you like what or how much control the Capitol has on them, because none of them want to be there, none of them want to go, but they don't really have a choice. So they have to dress up, they have to go, and I guess like Madge says, whenever they ask why she's wearing a pretty dress, then she says, well, if I get picked, I want to look nice, because you want to represent your country or your district or whatever state, I guess it would be the equivalent of. But you want to represent them, and you want to do them proud, so you try to look as nice as you can. But at the same time, then you're just giving off this kind of artificial facade that everything's okay in District 12 when really it's not. But that's the only shot that the Capitol ever gets of you, is whenever you're looking your best at the reaping.
I actually thought of a different connection after I first one. I'll let you have yours.
Okay.
The other one I thought, and it really came about when we were talking previously about the coming of age. And I really started to think that it's almost as if it's like the bar mitzvah or the sweet 16 party, like the coming out party.
Yeah.
So they're now 12 years old, they're of age, and you have to get all dolled up so you can go down there and be ready. It's your premiere is like the possibility of being
your debutante ball.
Yes.
That's even more sinister.
And I actually had a different thought of what it could symbolize is, like if someone dies and they have their funeral, what do? Like someone dresses them up in their best clothes, their face looks perfect, their hair is done. So this is kind of symbolizing someone's funeral.
Which is really morbid.
Yeah.
But I guess,
going off to their death.
If Prim's the one that's chosen, you could assume that she's not going to make it out, and then it probably is her funeral.
Okay, great. All right, my next question is, what do you think is the cruelest part of the reaping and why? Just the reaping itself. What's the coolest part of that?
I had a highlight for this. I wonder if I can find it. I think it's the fact that they take their children. And if I ever find why, oh, I found it. So the fact that they take the kids, they're not even people who have lived their entire life, have had a chance to contribute and have a family. They take your children, which is probably the most cruel thing you can do to a family. And in mine, it's on page 17. It says, taking the kids from our districts, forcing them to kill one another while we watch. This is the Capitol's way of reminding us how totally we are at their mercy. How little chance we would stand of surviving another rebellion. Whatever words they use, the real message is clear. Look how we take your children and sacrifice them, and there's nothing you can do. If you lift a finger, we will destroy every last one of you, just as we did in District 13. And so I think like that sense of control, that they're using something that's so precious to you and something that you love so much to dominate over you and to continue to control you is just, it's very twisted, and it's probably the worst like form of government that you could think of, one that doesn't value its citizens and doesn't value its future.
That's true. Absolutely. I also think that it's one of the worst parts of the reaping is that on the face, it almost looks like it's a celebration.
Yeah.
It's a holiday. Katniss says, let's see, but today, despite the bright banners hanging on the buildings, there's an air of grimness. The camera crews perched like buzzards on rooftops only add to the effect. So, for some people that might be watching, perhaps those that don't have kids, it's an exciting time for them. It's a day off of work. It's a day that they don't have to go into the mines or whatever industry they work in. They get to go to the square, but at the same time, then they're having to watch two families have their children ripped away. So I think the fact that some people almost treat it as a game, and then that there's camera crews on top of it to watch the anguish of the people that are picked.
Yeah, I agree.
So
And I like the simile that she uses, the vultures, because vultures like eat dead things.
yes, which also adds to the
Good
brutal nature of it.
I thought too, one of the most evil things about it was just that your name's in the reaping if your family's poor, and in order, every time you have to ask for food, for a year's supply of food, your name goes in the reaping another time. So it's farther dividing the class system as well. So I don't think that's very good.
And the fact that like if you are poor, then you have to risk it all the more. Like, that doesn't seem
Right.
None of it seems fair, but that makes
None
it
of
seem completely unfair.
Right. Okay. And my last question is, can you see any parallels between the country of Panem, the reaping, and/or the society that condones them, and other related events and cultures in the history of the world? So think about like things that have happened in history that you might be able to compare.
Well, I was thinking that the reaping itself, it reminded me of the Holocaust and the fact that people that haven't necessarily done anything wrong or spoken out against their government were punished simply because of who they are.
And it reminds me of whenever you read about the Holocaust, like you see like they're all lined up and they're called off and roll. Like there's that everybody meets in the square, and then whoever doesn't make it out doesn't make it.
Well, I just finished reading a book called The Book Thief. I don't know if anyone has read that, but there's a couple of scenes where it talks about them marching, like the Jewish people marching to a certain place, and to me that just seems like them marching to the square, awaiting their fate.
So I had the bridge builder worksheet, and your question actually kind of connects to my text itself, so I'm just going to go there. I talked about on page 16, they give the history of Panem, and it's at the very beginning of the reaping, whenever like they're introducing everything. And the man says the result was Panem, a shining capital ringed by 13 districts, which brought peace and prosperity to its citizens. Then came the dark days, the uprising of the districts against the capital. 12 were defeated, the 13th obliterated. The Treaty of Treason gave us the new laws to guarantee peace, and as our yearly reminder that the dark days must never be repeated, it gave us the Hunger Games. And it kind of reminded me of like all the uprisings in the Middle East and things, and how they try to use social media to like become more powerful than the government, but then the government just like turns off the internet so that they don't have a way to communicate. And this idea of having a government that's so controlling and is so fearful for rebellion that they kill their own citizens and they take away all of their freedoms, it really isn't that far-fetched. It's not happening here, but it's happening in other places.
I think sometimes we realize how lucky we are to live where we live and to have those freedoms.
So I guess I'll go over my other connections. My text itself connection was from page 14, where she talks about wanting to protect Krim, and I just made that connection because I have 6 younger siblings, and so I know what it's like to want to try to help them and want to keep them safe and keep them away from all of the bad things in the world. So it's easy for me to relate to Katniss that way. And then my text-to-text connection was actually related to our textbook. And on page 15 through 17 is the whole reaping scene, I guess. And I connected it to the theme of coming of age, because to me it seems like the reaping is their coming of age. From the ages of 12 or 13 to 18, they do this every year, and it shapes them as they grow up, and it changes who they are in their adult lives, and everything they go through, they'll always remember the reaping. So to me, it has that coming of age feel to it, even if it's kind of in a different way.
Kind of relates back to what you said about like bar mitzvah or.
Yeah.
Well, and I also think that's a very good point that you made about how it shapes their future. Because Gail and Katniss, when they're in the woods, have the conversation where Gail asks if someday Katniss would want to have kids.
Yeah.
And she says, absolutely not. Not in this world, not in a world where the Hunger Games exist.
Yeah.
So it definitely has, at 16, already shaped who she's going to become because of the way the world is set up.
And I think I can understand that. Like, I wouldn't want to bring a child into the world knowing that I'm, setting them up to go through this same system that I've gone through.
Those are good connections.
Thank you.
All right.
Can we go next?
Sure. I was the diction detective and the reporter, so I'll do the diction detective first. On page 4, I selected the phrase, men and women with hunched shoulders, swollen knuckles, many who have long since stopped trying to scrub the coal dust out of their broken nails and lines of their sunken faces. I picked the quote because I really think that it was a very descriptive quote. The way that the author tells you about the people, she doesn't just tell you that they're tired from their day's work. She goes into they have hunched shoulders, they have swollen knuckles, and they've even gotten to the point where they even stop trying to scrub the coal out of their fingernails and their faces. So it really painted that picture so I could see what those folks looked like. I really think that she described them that way because the people just aren't physically worn out from their mentally or their physically exhausting jobs. They're emotionally broken as well. I think the fact that they're not even trying to get the coal dust out of them shows that that's become part of who they are. That's not something that they can ever get away from.
They've just given up.
Mm-hmm.
I highlighted that part too because it reminded me of Pittsburgh. Like I was trying to get an idea of what the town looked like, and you see those old pictures of Pittsburgh and the steel city, and how everything was just kind of covered in that layer of hard work. And now, I mean, the city's kind of revived itself, but prior to that, it kind of, I think, had that feel to it, so.
Yeah, I also kind of thought maybe a little coal mining town like in West Virginia.
Yeah.
That's kind of run down and. Okay. The next one I picked is on page 19. Bright and bubbly as ever, Effie Trinket trots to the podium and gives her signature, "Happy Hunger Games, and may the odds be ever in your favor." I picked that because it shows the really sharp contrast between Effie's attitude and the actions of those that live in District 12. And we've kind of talked about that already a little bit. That I really think the author puts that in there to show that some people do view it as a sporting event. Maybe for them, it's like the opening ceremony of the Olympics. They're going to see who's going to represent their district within the Hunger Games. So I think that that's just, again, a very cruel part about the reaping. And especially to know that with the Hunger Games, the whole thing is going to be televised. People are going to tune in and watch some sick version of, Survivor, where the contestants, when they don't just get voted off the island, they get killed at the end. And then my last one is the crowd draws a collective breath, and then you can hear a pin drop. And I'm feeling nauseous and so desperately hoping that it's not me, that it's not me, that it's not me. And I picked that because I thought that the author did a great job describing the atmosphere in the square. The way that she wrote it, I could really hear everyone go, and then wait for the name to be drawn. So I thought that that was a great way of depicting that. I also put that Katniss shows her young age. She shows that she's only 16 years old by the fact that she's focused on not me, not me, not me. And I think part of the reason that that stood out to me is that throughout the rest of the chapter, she's talking so intently about how she's trying to protect Prim and keep her safe. But at the moment when a name's about to be drawn, she's focused on herself. She's not going, not Prim, not Prim, not Prim, but it's about her that time. Now, I know that Prim's odds of being selected are very slim. She only has one slip of paper in the bowl. But at the same time, it was not me instead of not Prim.
I think, I don't know, maybe you could look at that as like she's thinking not me, not me, not me, because if it's her, then she can't provide for Prim. So there's like a selfish side to it, but then there's a not selfish side too, because if she knows if she gets picked, who's going to take care of Prim? Because her mom doesn't hunt, her mom's not capable. Prim has goat, but that's not going to get her very far.
Right.
So.
That's a good point.
I'll go next if you want. I also did the artist one. So with the artist, I just get to like sit and let everybody stare at my beautiful artwork for a couple of minutes while they ponder on it. and then I explain it to them. So I'm just gonna pass it over to you, and then you can pass it around to everybody else. I'm just gonna sit back.
Does it have to be in color?
Mine's not. It's very detailed. Sometimes not adding color just adds
Yeah.
another effect, you know, something like a black and white. So I kind of took your illustration to kind of be like the bowl or like the bucket that holds all the
I was going for that,
name
so
tickets.
go me.
And at the bottom, I see Primrose's
Yeah.
name, kind of like she's the one that stood out.
Uh-huh.
But then all the other tickets that are inside, you would think they like to say people's names,
Yes.
but they really are depicting like important themes or concepts or ideas that took place in the chapter. So I like that.
Yeah. Well, when I went to like do my drawing, first I'm not very artistic, so there were a bunch of like scenes and things that I wanted to draw, but I knew I couldn't do them justice. So then I was like, well, what's just something that symbolizes the chapter? And I was just going to draw Primrose's ticket at first, because it's all leading up to her ticket. And then I decided that the reaping, like this event is kind of like the inciting incident and the big kind of snowball effect for the whole book. So I put her ticket there and I made the bowl, but then I realized that everything else that has happened in the chapter is kind of like building up to the reaping too. So we're talking about her dad and how she has to provide for Primrose now because her dad's not there, and how the government controls them so they have the reaping, and how the reaping then goes to the Hunger Games. So it all seemed to kind of center or revolve around this one event. So that's why I decided to draw it. I guess it was supposed to be more of a symbol than like something from the book.
That was good. Okay.
All right, I'm going to skim over the reporter role just because I think that one's probably, I think, one of the easiest
Yeah,
roles.
because it's mostly summary.
Right.
It might
So,
even be good to just start off with, like, that'd be
Yeah.
a good role to start
Yes,
off with too.
and I
It
thought
kinda
that
gives a
too.
summary.
but yeah, it gives a summary, so if there's someone that maybe didn't understand part of the story, they can get caught up there. So first is the setting. It's in Panem, which is formerly North America, specifically in District 12, in the park called the Seam. It also takes place a little bit in the meadow and the woods as Katniss and Gale go out to hunt. There's not a year given, which I thought was a little bit creepy. It makes you wonder, is this something that could possibly happen in the near future? You never know. You don't know where the world's going to be in 5 years or 10 years. But we do know that America, as we know it, no longer exists. And the story begins early in the morning on the day of the reaping. Changes in the setting or mood. There was a big change when they entered the woods. Katniss comments on the fact that Gale says she only smiles in the woods. So there they feel a little bit more at ease, not so closed in by the chain link fence in District 12. Some of the events, major plot events that happened, there was the hunting in the woods. We talked already about that. Despite it being illegal, it's something that Katniss and Gale both do to provide for their families. Preparing for the reaping, again, we've talked about that, where everyone has to go home. They make sure that they bathe and they shower. And honestly, they probably don't have hot water. I would imagine that they only had hot water if they were to boil it over over a open fire, something like that. And actually, I must say that I'm surprised that they have things like television cameras.
Yeah.
Because at the beginning of the story, I imagined that it was very much like colonial times,
that's
maybe.
what I thought.
I didn't think they would have anything as far as
I wonder if
electricity
they
or-
only have them like on the days when the Capitol brings them.
Right. But still, to know that they exist somewhere and not everywhere, I thought that was something that struck me. And then the last major event, of course, is the reaping that we've also talked about. The town square being decorated like a holiday, but really it's a sad and anxious time for everyone in District 12. And then the last part of the reporter's job is the characters. Katniss has been identified as the main character, and we've also talked a lot about her features, how she acts, major life events such as her dad being killed. And then Gale, Primrose, and her mother are all supporting characters. Gale shows a lot of similar feelings that Katniss has, but seems to be a little more vocal with how he feels against Panem. And Prim just being small and gentle, very young. And her mother, who has had a strained relationship with Katniss due to the death of her father and her emotional withdrawal and the way that Katniss has had to step up.
Good summary. All right, do we go through every row? So that's our lit circle. Okay, so obviously yours probably won't be quite that long because you're
Thanks for
not